Children, in the last class we have discussed what are the natural and man-made disasters. You have done it in the last chapter, and we have seen that how harmful they are. It affects the community or the society economically, mentally. It disrupts the environment, causes loss of life and property, as well as the livelihood. The whole country, all the people, they are affected whenever there is a disaster. We all know that India is a disaster prone country, as all sorts of disasters occur here. Like towns on the banks of the rivers, they are prone to flood. Places near the coast are prone to cyclones and tsunamis. Places near the Himalayas are prone to the earthquake, landslides, avalanches. Places near the volcanoes always are vulnerable to volcanic eruptions. And the other kind of disasters like the terror attack or accidental disasters, they are also on a very high frequency in India. Therefore, there is a need of disaster management, especially in the countries which are underdeveloped or developing. They need disaster management to a very large extent. Now, what is disaster management? It means preparing for the disaster, producing risk of disasters, responding to the disasters, recovering from disasters, and reducing the risk of disaster. Now, how is it defined? The United Nations defines a disaster as a serious disruption of functioning of the community or a society. Disasters involve widespread human, material, economic, or environmental impacts which exceed the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources. It means that the situation wherever a disaster takes place is very difficult, and therefore a pre-planning for such kind of areas is very important. Now, why is disaster management important? A disaster, whether it is natural or man-made, can strike any time without warning, especially the natural disasters like earthquakes. The geographical location and landscape of India exposes it to the earthquakes as well as many kinds of weather-related disasters. When a natural disaster occurs in a developing country like India, it is usually the poor who have suffered the most. I think if you are following news, you are very much aware that the whole country, in fact, the whole world is going through a disaster. Where in India, especially, we have found that the poor people they are facing major problems of shelter, food, economic status, daily wages, etc. Therefore, it is extremely important for the government, the people and social organizations like the NGOs to be prepared with proper plans and arrangements to face any kind of disaster. Proper and prior planning can help in limiting and minimizing damages and losses resulting from any disaster, natural or man-made. Now, what are the steps involved in disaster management? Now, there are several kinds through which the government tries to help the disaster prone areas. First is the mitigation, that is public education about the hazards and how to improve the infrastructure, how to educate them to face any kind of disaster which to some extent can be predictable. Recovery, that is economic recovery, like the debris management, housing, health and social services, how to recover the damage, that also the government has to plan. And it has to prepare for an emergency response plans, training and exercises. The response has to be life safety incident stabilization, property preservation, evacuation and shelter and mass care. So these are the four areas where the government has to look into. Now, the government undertakes various mitigation steps to counter the different types of disaster. A special department for disaster management has to be set up to tackle the disaster related incidents. Funds are set aside for providing relief and disaster management. There are advanced warning and sound forecasting system in a place in a disaster prone area. There are many organizations, that is the NGOs, which provide relief and rehabilitation work in case of these terrifying events. The government also creates public awareness about disaster preparedness through its various programs. There are disasters that are region specific. The community also must be well prepared to deal with these disasters. Like the people who are living in flood prone area, they should be educated enough, or they should be given some kind of knowledge about how to face the problem of flood and what steps to be taken in order to be safe, where to go. The government should make arrangements for them to stay whenever there is a flood. Proper arrangement of food and space has to be done. Now, people here should be equipped with medicines, food, shelter material, etc. The non-governmental organizations, as I told you about the NGOs, the Red Cross Society, the UN agencies, the police, and army have always assisted in such situations. How the police has helped us in this disaster, we we already know, and we pay a salute to them how efficiently they have done their work. Then the types of disaster which you have done in the previous chapter. Here four types are given, but I think the natural disasters and the man-made disasters are the main ones. Complex emergency, which involves breakdown of authority, looting, or an attack on strategic installation, including conflict situation and war. Then pandemic emergencies, which involve a sudden onset of contagious disease that affects health, disrupts services, business, brings economic and social costs. So these are the various types of disaster which you have done in the previous chapter.
Different types of natural disasters and how to save yourself during a disaster. The most common natural disasters are fire, earthquake, and flood. Let us take a look at the different warning signals associated with them. Bell. A bell is used to inform people that a fire has broken out. Flashlight. A torch or a flashlight directed at your eyes also means that there is a fire. So hurry and go out to a safe place. Ground shaking, things clattering. If the ground around you shakes vigorously and things keep clattering at the same time, understand that it is an earthquake. Whistle. A whistle is used to inform that someone is trapped during an earthquake. Flag shaking. If you see someone shaking a flag during rainy season, it means that the area is flooded.
Now, disasters are not confined to India only. It happens all over the world, and the government of different countries have taken various steps, and they follow certain rules and the ways how to bring down or take precautionary measures when man-made or natural disasters occur, especially in these the disasters prone areas. So we'll begin with the safety measures to be taken during the earthquake. Now, the most disastrous earthquakes that happened in India were the Bihar earthquake in 1934, Uttarkashi earthquake in 1991, Maharashtra earthquake in 1993, and the Gujarat earthquake in 2001. These are supposed to be the most disastrous, where a lot of loss of life and property took place.
Safety measures that we need to follow during earthquake. If you are indoors, quickly move to a safe location in the room, such as under a strong desk, a strong table, or along an interior wall. Stay away from large mirrors, glass windows, hanging objects, heavy furnitures, or appliances and fireplaces. If your mother is cooking, ask her to turn off the gas and take cover. If you are outdoors, move to an open area. If you are in a car, ask your father to slow down smoothly and stop on the side of the road. Avoid stopping on or under bridges, electric power lines, trees, and large signposts.
Three steps to be followed at the time of earthquakes, which are drop, cover, and hold. Drop means dropping to the ground as soon as you feel that your building is shaking. Cover, cover yourself by moving under a bed or table, and hold something very strong so that you should not be affected by the severe shaking of. So these are the three things which you have to follow: drop, cover, and hold. It is also important to keep the first aid box in at home as well as in the schools, because people who are affected by it, or maybe you are affected by it, then you will need all these. So therefore it is important to keep the first aid box. Flood, the next type of disaster which happens very commonly, happens in India as well as in the world, is the flood. You have done about it, how it is caused and what are the effects of it. Now we'll discuss the preventive measures to be taken in the flood prone areas. Now, a flood occurs when a sudden influx of water submerges land, posing a danger to life and property. When flood water submerges towns, villages, and farms, it forces people to move to the other area, and therefore the government has to make arrangements for evacuation centers where these people can be settled. Now, people living in low-lying areas in the river basin suffer the most. The loss of life and property is huge. It causes massive disruption to the normal life, and it forces authorities to shut the schools and colleges as heavily used suburban trains and city life comes to an halt. An example we can say is of Mumbai. The 2005 flood was the most worst flood of the world, when the rainfall received in the area was more than 200 centimeters. The whole life of Mumbai was affected, from train to rail towards the power cut off. Many people died and became homeless. Mumbai came to a standstill due to flooding. Then it's not only in India, the parts of the other worlds, some places of the other worlds, the rivers of the various countries or continents also face flood problems. Now, in this picture, you are seeing that the northern part of India is shown, which is flood-prone area, mainly the Indo-Gangetic Plain, because it is a low-lying area and many rivers are draining in this area, which are snow-fed, and at the time of monsoons, these rivers get flooded and affect the people's life. Now, when we talk about the other floods of happening, which has happened in other countries, that is the in 1844, the river Missouri in North America, which was considered as the biggest flood ever recorded. Other than that, the Yangtze River also flooded in 1931, which was disastrous, and in 1984 also a massive destruction was caused in this area to the adjoining areas. Then the Bangladesh flood in 1974 also was of the same kind. A lot of damage to life and property had occurred. So whenever the flood takes place, or the areas which are prone to the flood, what are the preventive measures that we need to take or the government needs to plan? Now, first is the making of or maintaining dikes and embankments along the rivers. The government and the relief organizations, they also have provisions of food shelters in vulnerable areas along the flood-prone region, so that people and livestock can be easily evacuated and provided relief to. Now, these kinds of embankments are generally made at the sides of the river, which are also known as the flood bank or stop bank, and it is an elongated naturally occurring ridge or artificially constructed fill or wall that regulates water levels. It is usually earthen and often parallel to the course of a river in its floodplain or along the low-lying areas. Now, sometimes the flood barriers are also made along the rivers and the bank of the rivers, so that whenever there is a rise in the level of the river, it can be stopped by these barriers. Now, some government should also provide with by immediately deploying rescue boats and have communication lines open and functioning in order to rescue people caught in rising levels of the water. So there has to be a proper arrangement of the boats so that people can be taken to the proper areas, which are the high level areas. Then evacuation centers have to be made by the government, where the arrangement of food and medicine is provided to the people. Some areas are given to each family so that they can live there till the area is affected by the flood, and then they can go back whenever the their own houses are reconstructed again. So this has to be done, has to be maintained so that the people can be shifted there quickly. Now the in the camps or the evacuation centers, a proper arrangement of dry food like bread, jam, butter, and some tinned fruits, food, or and the medicines, especially medicines, which is very very important to keep. Now the other things which has to be taken care is that the all electrical means must be switched off to avoid short circuits. One should keep a track of all the warning about the flood given through TV and radio, which is very very important. People should save household items and valuables by placing them at a height. Toilets should be blocked with sandbags to prevent any backflow of sewage. One should be careful of snakes and snake bite, which is very very common in the flood. Sufficient essential supplies of food, water and medicine should be stored in case there is a threat of the flood in that area. Now here, just to recapitulate, what are the things which should be practiced during a flood, and the preventive measures which can be taken. Just go through it. Well, that is all for the preventive measures to be taken at the time of flood. Next, we will do the preventive measures against the droughts.